one who is in charge of the Blackstone fund here in France. And finally, Mr. Paris, who is in charge of the Schwarzman Scholarship, and we will learn a bit more about this. Just to announce, for those of you who may be concerned, for us, it is for you, it will be an option of your M2 year to apply to this program. Of course, there will be a tough selection, but you can apply, and it will replace part of your program here. So I leave the floor to Professor Mariani, who will introduce this study.
Right. Good morning to each one of you, and it looks like a sort of stadium. Young kids coming or whatever, but no, it's Mr. Schwarzman who is here. Just a few words. Of course, speaking is always lying, because the truth of a person is partly in the who's who and partly on the web. The truth of the person is very often the, I wouldn't say the secret part of it, but of him or her, but the part you have to know better. And I think that the idea of the foundation is also connected to that idea, that beyond the visibility, the formal visibility of each one, there is something that has to be found and that will grow and express into some kind of leadership. I only know a few of you. I'm an emeritus professor here in the marketing department. I have shared for a while. Try to find which year it is. On that year, what happened? Ronald Reagan started his second presidency. On that year, you had the first cartoon of Calvin and Hobbes. On that year, you had the movie Back to the Future and Rocky IV. Which year? Yeah, who said?
1985.
85. What else happened? The creation of Blackstone. So, Stephen, you're between Back to the Future and Rocky, if he were moving, and probably reality has always to deal with these two aspects. You have to try harder to fight, and also to have a vision of the future. Sometimes go back, sometimes project yourself into the future. CEO and co-founder of Blackstone, Stephen Schwarzman, has been involved in the company he's been leading, with 340 billion assets under management, end of 2015. He didn't stop on that, which is already exceptional. He's a philanthropist, supporting education, school, and he's making the link between business and philanthropy, which is not an oxymoron, which has to be built, which has to be tightly connected to reality. And he's been sponsoring Yale University with scholars, and you're here because you know, and he will tell you about the program with China. And Mr. Schwarzman is also a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, Business Council, and many other institutions. He's been a student at Yale and at Harvard. Nobody's perfect, and we have to know that the French authorities has honored him as an officier de la Légion d'honneur, and we're very proud you have accepted this French distinction. Thank you very much for being here. The students are not here to hear me, and they're here to hear you. And turning to Iris, I have to give the phone to Margot, who will start with the questions.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Schwarzman, Dr. Paris, and Mr. Herrera
We're very honored to have you here at HEC Paris, and I feel very privileged as president of HEC Asia to be interviewing you, Mr. Schwarzman, during the course of the next 30 minutes before leaving the floor to Dr. Garris, who will present Schwarzman Scholars. So, as it's been mentioned, you've studied at Yale, and then you completed by an MBA from Harvard Business School. And at Yale, you studied a interdisciplinary major that included diverse topics such as psychology, sociology, anthropology, and biology. So here's my first question. Since many undergraduates who are interested in business major in economics, major usually in economics or finance, and you've studied this interdisciplinary major, how do you feel that that has influenced you as a business leader?
Well, that's a good question. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me, and unfortunately, English is my only functional language. I started French in the 8th grade. I was a complete failure. We'll stick to English, but it's great to be here at one of the great universities in the world, because I've learned a bunch about HEC, and it's so selective, and the students are really so terrific. It's a pleasure for me to be here. For the people who are over on the side there, you're going to end up, why don't you come over closer here, because we're going to run out of space. So you can be over here on the side if you want. In terms of the answer to that question, I've never had, I know you will find this disappointing, but I've never had an economics course. And I really haven't missed it. I was always interested in people, and still am. How do people think? And why do they think what they think? And how do you change what they think? It's always been a curiosity of mine, and it's enabled me to approach something like finance, which is a complex system, but it's a lot like I've found, giving a speech. Audiences behave as if they're one person, if you're the person in front. You all think you're individuals, and you are, but the response to something tends to be more of a group response. And so as I look at finance, where I've now spent really since 1969, before any of you were born, and I still love what I do, and I continue doing it. It's really a series of problems which need solutions. Some of which are systemic, like when we had the financial crisis. I tend to look at things as if they're relatively complex systems, if they're relatively simple. I'm always looking for something that's in common, where you can start dealing with it and having it respond, and then try and change things or solve a problem. So, finance is sort of, it appears to be what I do, but it's a bit of an overlay to how I think. And finance is not that complex, as you know. It's other than if you're doing advanced calculations using derivatives or doing something like that. It's pretty much add, subtract, multiply, and divide on a certain third grade level. And the rest of it is figuring out what's truly happening in the world. What's happening, whether it's with bank regulation, where's that going to take you? It's a series of issues like that, of integrated systems. And when you start playing with a system, what's going to happen? And to whose advantage is it? So I do that intuitively, because that's sort of the way I'm wired. But I may pretend I'm like a CEO of a major organization that I started, which is really a great place, frankly, which we can talk about later, I guess, depending upon what questions I'm asked. By the way, getting an MBA was very good. I mean, particularly for me, because I was always intuitively an entrepreneur. I always liked, you know, I had my brothers working for me to shovel snow, and it took them 3 years before they realized they were doing all the work. And we split the profits 50-50. I got the business, they did the work, and then they realized perhaps I was overcharging them, so we changed the deal. You know, I used to deliver newspapers, I used to sell light bulbs, I used to deliver, you know, sort of telephone books when they had them. I'd do anything to like create something, do something, because when I was a student I didn't have any money and I wanted to buy a stereo music, and so I took over one of the student agencies and I just made it make a lot more money so that I had a specific objective. I didn't care that much about the agency. I just wanted the stereo so I could have a good time in my room and have some good dates. And so, you know, that's what I did. And you know, it's finding a need that needs to be fulfilled and solving that need. And that's really what a full life is like. But business-wise, if you can do that all the time, you become very successful.
Thank you. Well, my next question is actually on Blackstone, so we'll be able to talk more about it. When you started out with your partner Pete Peterson, Blackstone had just like $400,000 on its balance sheet, but you had large private equity aspiration back when it was considered a very new and risky asset. Since then, Blackstone has become one of the world's leading investment firms, and you have been dubbed the undisputed king of private equity by Forbes magazine. So how do you explain this huge growth that Blackstone has known, and where do you see Blackstone going?
Well, we started, and some of you will start businesses, and some of you will work in relatively small places that were just starting. So the important thing about starting a business is you have to have what I call a unique fantasy. Fantasies are great in life generally, but in business, you have to think of something that other people aren't doing. Because if all you do in life is do what everybody else is doing, but you think you're like better than everyone else, the odds are you're not better than everyone else, and there's somebody else supplying the same thing. So why should anyone really deal with you? It's so much easier to find something that everybody else isn't doing. And so as good as you are, then you become great because you're doing something that's relatively unique. So part of being successful, there are many different elements of it. You have to start, it's like a building. You have to have a great foundation. You have if you're an architect, you have to know what you want to be building, and it has to be beautiful. And if you do a series of buildings like that, you become a famous architect. It's actually pretty simple. So the base is, well, what are you trying to do? Forget doing it. What are you really trying to do? So when we started Blackstone, you know, we had certain assets. We were both, two of us, very well-known people in finance. But okay, we needed to have some cash flow. We actually met for 3 months every day, just the two of us, for breakfast. These were like really long breakfasts, like 3-hour breakfasts. Just debating, what should we be as Blackstone? And what would make people want to really deal with us other than the fact that we were so wonderful? Just like you all think you're wonderful, right? That's not enough, actually, for you to believe you're wonderful. And so we said, okay, what's happening in the world is that, come on in. You can come up in the front here if you want. That's a good one, sitting down. What we realized is we were started a business at a time where there was rapid consolidation in finance, and smaller firms like Lehman Brothers, where I chose to work, had about 550 people. When I joined, when Lehman died in 2011, it had 30,000. The difference between 550 to 30,000 is, I guess, HEC having 80,000 people instead of 4,000. Would be a little different at 80,000. You might not want to be there if there were 80,000. So we thought, okay, it's going to be this giant consolidation. There were going to be people who just were very talented. They didn't want to be in big places. The world was going to continue to change. So we said, okay, we're going to do a three-part strategy. First, we're going to go in the M&A business, which I was the head of Lehman's M&A department, and you don't have to put up any equity to do M&A business. It's a talking business, and people hopefully pay you a lot of money. This is good. And you don't have to dilute your ownership, right, because you don't have to raise capital. Secondly, the private equity business, which was then called the leveraged buyout business, was the greatest economic model that I knew of at that time. And the people who were doing the business, there were only a few of them. They happened to be like friends of mine, literally. It was sort of New York-centric. And we were all about the same age. The oldest, some of these other guys were like 3-4 years ahead of me. And I knew what they were doing, and I knew that was a great business, and we should go into that. The third thing we should do is wait until there was a major disruption, which always happens, by the way, in finance, and see what that economic opportunity was, and recruit the best person you could find to prosecute that opportunity. So we decided that we would only hire 10s on a scale of 10. So if you hire people, they sort of go, it's a funny scale, they go from 10 to 7. And anybody below 7 is literally unemployable. 10s are like amazing people, and you meet some of them, and they can do anything. They can grow businesses, they can hire the right people, they can sense when there's trouble, they can get you out of trouble, they can build giant things. These are called 10s. 9s sort of can do almost everything, but not really nearly as well. And 8s are very good mechanically. They can execute things. And 7s, you sort of don't really want to know. And below that, you just can't hire them. I mean, so we said, okay, if we're going to go into a new business, we have to have a 10. And that 10 will help us build a remarkable business. And the third criteria was that we wouldn't go into any business unless it generated intellectual capital, which we could use to make our existing businesses stronger. So it took us like 3-4 months to figure out that's what we wanted to do. It is now 30 years later. We are doing exactly the same things. And we've gone into all these different businesses, none of which we think is a diversification. We think they're just like amazing things that fit with our basic business. So now we're $336 billion. I remember when we had no dollars. 336 is better than none. But I can remember every person who's given us money because nobody has to. It's a privilege for someone to trust you, and you can never violate their trust. You can never lose their money. You have to be scrupulously honest. You have to be direct. You have to be open. You have to be totally sympathetic and grateful that these people give you money, because they can give anybody money. So what we've done now is we're at a stage where our 336 compared to a regular money manager is much different, because we get a share of the profits on most of that money, which ranges typically from 20% to 15% in fixed income. And so if you really wanted to get the scale of a Blackstone, you'd have to measure and multiply our 336 by some number like 15 or 20. So if you did that, you'd end up with like $4.5 to $5 trillion of the equivalent of long-only money, which would make us the largest money manager in the world. And we make large amounts of money when things are going well. We're a little cyclical. And in 2014, we're the most profitable money manager in the world. I think about us like we're a little bitty company, like we're just starting out. We still have to do everything right. And in a way, in finance, it's like the restaurant business. You're only as good as your last meal. Nobody cares what you did for them years ago. If you poison your customer at a restaurant and you spend the night in the bathroom, you don't go back to that restaurant very quickly, even if it has a great reputation. You go back maybe after a year. If they poison you the second time, you never go back. And you tell your friends never to go there. And that's the fragility of reputation in finance. And that's why it has to be zealously guarded, and everyone in your organization has to understand that that's the risk profile. You have to engineer out risk. Now, at the top of the cycle, last July or whatever, before the Chinese visited the down market on the world, that our 400,000 got up to 52 billion. So for those with really primitive math skills, that's a much better place to be than the 400,000. But you don't make the money because you're trying to make. You make it because you're doing great things for your customers, and you're doing nothing but trying to be the best in the world. You have to have, as managers, which I think everybody goes to HEC to either start something or manage something or be excellent at something. You have to have a vision. And if your vision is to be the best in the world at what you do, then you better articulate that to everyone you're working with. And everybody's standards better be at a certain level. And as you can tell, I'm somewhat unreasonable. I think I'm friendly and lovable, but unreasonable in terms of what my expectations are of everybody who works at the firm. And we have amazing people who work at the firm, and they're amazing because that's what's attractive if what you set out to do is to be the best in the world. Now, you may fall short from day to day, and then you analyze it and you say, well, what did we not do that was as good as it should be? And if you keep that as your standard, because almost everybody in this room is meant to be the head of something. That's why you come to HEC, not to be the middle or the bottom. You're meant to be the head of something. And so you have to always, as a leader, be able to articulate what your mission is. And then making it happen isn't as hard if you know what you really want to be doing.
Thank you for your insight on being a business leader. I want to talk now about your philanthropist activities. Since, to remind everyone, you have donated $100 million to the New York Public Library, which was the single largest donation in the library's history. You have gifted $150 million to Yale to transform Commons and its attached buildings into performing arts center and hub. And now you have founded Schwarzman Scholars. So you seem to have made education your cause. So what makes education such an important issue for you? And could you please talk to us briefly about Schwarzman Scholars and share what drove you to create such a program?
Yeah, the reason why education is so important to me is actually I was never the smartest kid in the class. So I was always trying to improve. And in America, and to some degree in France as well, but particularly in America, that is the mechanism of social and economic mobility. And I started out as just sort of a regular old middle-class American, and I wanted to be something more. But the only way you could do that in our country is by becoming educated. I forgot it had anything to do with anybody that you meet or that you form any kind of network or things like that. It's just the search for knowledge, the desire to learn, be better, improve. And schools of great caliber make that possible. And so I have a desire to make that possible for anybody who's got talent. And it's not having that ability to be educated, particularly in a globalization world, globalizing world, is like some cosmic handicap. And we need to have the best education we can so people can have the best opportunities. And I do stuff not just at great universities, but my wife and I are sending about 1,000 kids to parochial school in New York City. They graduate 98% of their kids. Half of them are at the poverty line or below. 90% are minority kids. And I think it's just transformative for them. So that's my theory, why I do it. It's like a passion. It's just being nice to people, giving them the opportunity to change their lives. Because not everybody is born into a life of ease or advantage. And everybody deserves a shot. So that's how I do that. Schwarzman Scholars was sort of, I guess we'll talk about that for a bit. Rob's much more organized than I am and has a presentation, and you'll be used to that. I'm a little more scattershot, but life, as you'll find as you get older, takes you in strange places you never would plan. And when you put yourself out there, stuff happens to you. And we were in the process of going public in 2007. It ended up being the second largest IPO in the world in the decade of 2000 to 2010, second to Google. And the Chinese government approached us to give us $3 billion for the IPO. We had 2 other countries approach us as well. The idea that I used to be begging for $5 million pieces of money for our funds shows what a transition can be when somebody you don't even know says, "How would you like $3 billion?" And so this is how you make great friends, when somebody offers you $3 billion and you take it. And so I got involved with China by accident, and we were the first firm that China invested in as equity since World War II. So this was a huge change in strategic direction for China. And I was put on the board of Tsinghua University, which was one of the top 2, we think the top 1 university in China. And I got to learn about China, and then people looked at Blackstone and they said, "Well, you all know something about China." And what I found was that not everybody liked China, not everybody was neutral to China. Some people hated China, and some people really liked China, but nobody was sort of neutral about it. And I got to know the senior leadership in China, and I got to see what it was like when they were threatened by other countries, and they tend to have a pretty vigorous response to that. And I learned that the professor at Harvard who did a study that talked about the 15 times that since the year 1500 there's been challenger countries challenging an incumbent world power. And China is a challenger country, and the US is the incumbent world power. And in the 12 of those 15 times that circumstance happened, there have been wars between the challenger and the incumbent. That's a bad percentage if you basically believe in peace as a concept. And I could see that the developed world was running out of gas. The developed world was losing the game of globalization. They weren't creating enough jobs. They weren't creating enough wealth, which creates political unhappiness. And usually the way political leaders over time who are looking for votes behave is they find some group of people to demonize because the performance of their economies is not working well. And this is pretty predictable stuff. If you look at history, you're seeing it repeat now. There's anger against what we call in the United States the top 1%. There's anger against financial people. There are different groups that governments target to have people focus on with their political unhappiness. And I felt just a matter of time before China becomes one of those targets, because they're still creating over 10 million jobs a year in China. And even though their stock market was overvalued and then went down again, it's still the second biggest economy. And the scenario that China long term grows much below 5% is pretty low. And France, for example, maybe it'll grow at 1. So even a slowed down China will be 5 times France. And there's a chance, and this isn't speaking to France at all, but just sort of in a general sense, that China will be a target, as you've seen now with something that Donald Trump was saying in the U.S. With a 45% tariff against China. And since we're huge trading partners, this would be beyond provocative from the Chinese perspective. And so I wanted to start something where we could create a cadre of extraordinary people, future leaders in the world, in their fields, whether it's political leaders, business leaders, leaders in the media, leaders in academics, who can go to China for a year, have a completely unique experience, and get to know China in a way, and then come back to their countries and be able to interpret what China was doing, and if they were doing something wrong, or not wrong, and they were being attacked, basically say to people in their countries, hey, why are we overreacting? If China was doing something wrong, which is certainly possible, or provocative, they can go back to their friends in China and say, what are you people doing? I just did one of these last year. They were doing something I thought was really ridiculous and dysfunctional from their perspective as well as someone else. And I organized a group of people, and sort of looks like it went away because they didn't really understand what their impact was in the non-Chinese world. And if I can do that just as one person, imagine if we had 200 people here, and those 200 over a lifetime become 10,000 steady state. So instead of just one of me trying to help out, there were 10,000 people. And those people would learn unique things about China to change your life. It'll be the largest economy in the world. And that's a safety net, as well as a really enhancing experience that people could get. And so I looked at the Rhodes Scholar type of structure, and I thought that was a good one in general. And we're going to be taking 200 people a year to Tsinghua University with a completely unique experience. We're going to get the leaders of the country to come to meet you. In America, it's pretty easy to meet the leaders of the country. They're always looking for money for elections. So if you have any money, they'll find you. And so they're very accessible in the United States. In China, they're not looking for money to be the senior leadership. They're not elected. Or if they're elected, maybe, but not by the people. And so you tend not to be able to really interact with those people. We'll be able to do that because Tsinghua, most of them went to Tsinghua. And so they're alumni, and Rob will show a video. And walking down the street at the university, there's a tall fellow who just is turning to the left, talking to somebody. He's got black hair, sort of bushy. He now happens to be the president of China. He's a Tsinghua graduate, as is the previous president of China, as is the head of the central bank, as is the finance minister, as is the vice premier, as is the head of the environmental ministry, and it goes on and on and on. And so we'll be able to get those people to come. We're going to have a mentor for each of the students who's a famous person in China. Jack Ma said he'd take a kid or two and go to Hangzhou, and Jack will explain his business and meet his family, and we've got all kinds of people like that. So what we're constructing is a program that simply does not exist in China as an access point. It just doesn't exist. And now, having worked on it for 4 years, I can tell you why it doesn't exist. It's exhausting to do this stuff, and you need a remarkable confidence of things that we have to be able to do it. You just don't wake up and say, I want to do this. So that's sort of how we got the Schwarzman Scholars. I gave $100 million to that to start, and Americans tend to be quite philanthropic. It's a little different tradition than the French, where the French state mostly provides money for cultural and educational and other types of institutions. U.S. is much more mixed, with huge reliance on individuals, and so we don't find it that remarkable to be writing big checks to do things to impact organizations, make them better, so the next group of people can have a remarkable experience.
Thank you, Mr. Schwarzman. It sounds like a very unique opportunity. Thank you so much for the interview. We would now like to invite the Global Director of Admission at Schwarzman Scholars, Dr. Robert Garris, who will present Schwarzman Scholars to you and then take questions on the program.
Thank you. I'm going to move over to the podium so I can run the PowerPoint. What we're going to do is share a presentation with you that'll take about 15 minutes, and then we'll use the rest of our time up until 1 o'clock to do question and answer. But what I want to do to start the presentation is to quickly recap what Steve said about the vision for Schwarzman Scholars, because I think you'll understand much better a lot of the decisions that have been made about the academic part of the program, about the admissions process, even about the way the building is constructed. If you keep in mind that long-term vision that 30 to 40 years from now, there are leaders in the political field and business field, in international organizations, media, and the academy who are, on the one hand, better at what they do in their own field because they understand how China is influencing their work, but also, much more importantly, who act as intermediaries between their home country and China, or if you're Chinese, between China and other parts of the world. And that long-term vision has really shaped a lot of the practical decisions that we've made about the program. In particular, the fact that we recruit students from all around the world and recruit students from every field makes Schwarzman Scholars really stand out in the scholarship world. You're probably familiar with the fact that a number of distinguished scholarships are limited in terms of citizenship to certain parts of the world, or might be limited to a particular academic field. And Schwarzman Scholars really stands out because it's so broad and because it has that very intentional long-term vision of building stronger relationships between China and the rest of the world. I'm going to go ahead and show you the video that Steve referred to, just so that you can see some of the images of Tsinghua University.
China is a fascinating, remote place. I think the world is curious about China. This is a country of enormous consequence with a different political system. And this is one of the few ways where not only can you have that exposure, but you can do it in a completely unique fashion.
Most scholarship programs are really credentials. And this program is so much more than that. It is really a catalytic experience. And Steve has worked in a real deep way with people in China to develop every detail of this program.
I was in Beijing when I first heard the idea of the Schwarzman Scholars program and of Schwarzman College. It's such an exciting prospect to think of a new institution based on Tsinghua campus with the sole purpose of improving mutual understanding between China and the West.
Tsinghua is the best place, is the key for anyone to understand China. And Tsinghua has long been the bridge between China and the other part of the world.
Students from all over the world will come to China under the program. China is the most populous country in the world, and it is the second largest economy, and in terms of its influence politically, it belongs among the superpowers.
In my opinion, an immersion experience is going to lead to a process of mutual understanding that will only make the world more peaceful, more economically prosperous, and ensure that the next generation that is rising into leadership roles around the world is a generation that has a better understanding of each other than anything that we've seen before.
The ideal global leader is one that is filled with one characteristic, and that's discernment. You need this sensitivity of business savvy, what's right business-wise, to match that cultural fit that has to happen.
The program was conceived a couple of years ago, and in the intervening time, a global group of experts have put in an enormous amount of effort into designing the program. All of that now is moving into the execution phase.
The devil's in the details, from the staff that's running the program, to the academic design of the program, to the way the building is structured, to the building of the building.
Imagine arriving here in July 2016, and you're going to walk into a fantastic physical space that is designed from bottom up to help enhance the academic and extracurricular experience.
The building is all about interaction between students. We begin, first of all, by a big open courtyard coming in from the street, which brings everybody together to one entrance. And then inside that, we have a big forum space. There are big, wide staircases. You walk up and you might meet someone coming down, and you stop and say, hey, what are you doing? Are you free for lunch? So stairs encourage interaction as well.
From scratch, we put together a curriculum with inputs from scholars and business leaders, political leaders all over the world. We ask the fundamental question, that is, what kind of leaders we want? What kind of education we will provide to these leaders of the 21st century of the world?
I think the Schwarzman program will be successful because it combines a number of important elements in educating people about China. One is a really strong and rigorous academic program. Second, exposure to really great leaders from different walks of life in China. And then taking students all around China to see the country, to understand the richness and variety of both China's strengths and its problems.
One of the truly important things about the Schwarzman Scholars isn't just what you learn, it's really about forming global relationships that can be utilized and activated over a lifetime.
Schwarzman Scholars are risk takers. They're people who see how the world is changing and are willing to do something different to be part of that change and to even shape that change.
10, 15, 20 years from now, there will be a meeting of government officials. And at that table, there will be Schwarzman Scholars, and they will know each other in that way. They will make a difference to their countries, and they'll make a difference to the world.
1 year spent doing something truly unique in your life will reset the way you look at things. It won't threaten your path to success. It will enhance it. And you'll become a broader, more interesting, more consequential person who sees a different world than the one you grew up in.
presentation is I'll talk a little bit about Tsinghua University and Schwarzman College, which is a new entity within Tsinghua University. I'll cover the academic side of things. If you're a Schwarzman Scholar, the anchor of your experience is a one-year master's degree in global affairs at Tsinghua University, so obviously we need to say a little bit about that. And then last but certainly not least, we'll talk about admissions. But let me say just a few words about Tsinghua, and I'll focus in particular on why Tsinghua is especially well suited to be a partner for Schwarzman Scholars in this effort to build a network of experts who connect China with the rest of the world. Tsinghua was created more than 100 years ago, at that time very intentionally to help build stronger relationships between China and the United States. And over the intervening century, China's mission has certainly expanded well beyond that. And at this point, Tsinghua's mission has expanded well beyond that, and Tsinghua really sits at a connecting point between China and the rest of the world. It's got a very global and international mission, and serving as that connecting point makes it a great partner for Schwarzman Scholars in our mission to strengthen those connections. Tsinghua also, for generations, has been training leaders for the country. Xi Jinping and Hu Jintao are two names that you probably recognize, who are Tsinghua alumni, but really throughout the national government, as Steve mentioned, in the provincial government, leaders of business around the country are Tsinghua alumni, and they bring that powerful alumni network to this project of building stronger links between China and the rest of the world. And what we've done is we've built a new entity called Schwarzman College. Schwarzman College is a residential college on the model that you might be aware of from places like Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Yale, where your residential life and your academic life intersect with each other. There are parts of the building, your residences, for example, where we've structured things so that you have the privacy of an individual room, which is a great benefit. In lots of university systems around the world, that's not the case. But those rooms are clustered in groups of 8 with a shared living space, so that you are constantly interacting with your international peers in the Schwarzman Scholars Program, learning from them, learning from people with different professional aspirations, and the learning happens even in the residential part of the building. The building also hosts visiting faculty from around the world. We're inviting faculty from prestigious institutions in North America, Europe, and other parts of the world to join us and be part of this project. They'll live in the building with you, be part of your advising life, take meals with you in the dining commons, but most importantly, they'll share in the teaching of classes, and I'll say a little bit more about that when I start describing the curriculum. And then finally, in the public parts of the building, we've really thought about them in ways to help ensure that you connect with and interact with your fellow students around Tsinghua University. So the event spaces are large enough so that we can invite other Tsinghua students and faculty to join in for those kinds of events. And in the dining commons as well, we hope that you'll invite other students from around Tsinghua University to share in the experience with you. The curriculum is also structured in ways so that sometimes it's more inwardly focused and is about building connections between you as a cohort of Schwarzman Scholars. And then there are other times in the curriculum where it's very outwardly focused and it's about building connections between you and other parts of China. I'll start with the core curriculum because that comes first chronologically. You'll spend the early part of the year from August to November doing the core curriculum with your fellow Schwarzman Scholars. I won't name all of the classes right now, but if you want to know, just ask me later during questions. But the big themes in the core curriculum are being sure that Schwarzman Scholars share a common understanding of how China is interacting with the rest of the world economically, how it's interacting with the rest of the world politically, culturally, and last but certainly not least, a major component of the core curriculum is leadership. There's a class on leadership that's designed on the Harvard Business School case teaching methodology where you study leadership as a concept, but there also are programs throughout the year where you'll engage in various kinds of exploration of yourself as a leader and discovering and working on your strengths and weaknesses in the kind of leader that you want to be. In the middle part of the year, essentially think of that as the winter, from December through March. You'll work on what we call the concentration. You'll develop a cluster of 4 courses working with the faculty, choosing from a menu of classes that are focused in one of these 3 fields that you see on the screen: public policy, economics and business, or international studies. And the idea here isn't necessarily to go deep in those fields. With just 4 courses, you can only go so deep, but to give you an exposure to those topics in the Chinese context and from a Chinese point of view. The last thing that I'll mention here in the early part of the year is the Mandarin language requirement. Every Schwarzman scholar who isn't already a native speaker of Mandarin will be required to dedicate time to working on the language. We're neutral about where you are in your Mandarin abilities when you enter the program, but we've dedicated time and resources and instruction to ensuring that whether you're a beginner or already fairly advanced, you become better at Mandarin over the course of the year. In the spring, essentially from March on, the curriculum moves into a mode that's much more outwardly focused and begins to think about how we connect you with other parts of the country. The major component of that, certainly in terms of your time investment between March and June, is the internship program. And our internship program is slightly different from what you may be familiar with other institutions, because we recognize that a lot of the Schwarzman scholars who arrive will either not have the Mandarin language skills or the connections to go out and get their own internships. So we're building relationships with a variety of kinds of institutions in Beijing. Chinese companies, multinational companies with offices in Beijing, government offices, nonprofit organizations, a wide variety so that we can match you as Schwarzman scholars to an internship opportunity that's going to help you develop your skills in the field that you're interested in exploring. And that experience over those periods of weeks will then connect back into the curriculum, because you'll also be writing a written product sort of like a thesis that will be submitted to the faculty at Tsinghua University and will become part of your academic program. So it's both a working experience and a learning experience at the same time. We mentioned earlier the mentoring program, which is another very important way that we're going to help connect Schwarzman scholars into the country. So much of this program is about both learning in an academic sense, but also building relationships between people who are already influential or we think will be influential in the future. And here we're connecting Schwarzman scholars to people who are already influential in China. Depending on your interests, we will match you with a mentor. Well, let's say if you're interested in the environment, we might match you with someone who works in the Ministry of the Environment. In fact, the Minister of the Environment has taken on a Schwarzman scholar in the coming year as his mentee. Steve mentioned earlier that Jack Ma will be serving as mentor for a couple of students who are interested in technology and entrepreneurship, and we could go on down the line. What I'm mentioning there is just to give you a sense that we're aiming high in terms of these mentoring relationships, so that you not only have someone who can help you better understand China during your year as a scholar, but hopefully helps you expand your professional networks and helps you build networks that will be part of your professional assets for the rest of your career. I'll just wrap up this section on connecting you out to the rest of the country by mentioning one other thing, and that's the intensive deep dive travel seminar. At one point in the year, we'll take small groups of Schwarzman scholars, say 20 to 25 at a time, away from Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong, the big global cities, and into some other part of the country, so that you can do a one-week deep dive on some particular topic in one particular place. It's impossible for us to expose you to the entire country in the course of a one-year program. You wouldn't spend any time at the university if we did that. But we do want to make sure that at least in one place you have that chance to go deep, build some connections, and expand your knowledge on some part of the country that's different from the big international global cities. The scholarship program is completely comprehensive. It covers everything that you can see here on the screen right now. And the reason that we're doing that is that we want to be sure that the selection committee is able to choose the most talented people, the people who seem to have the greatest promise of moving into leadership roles in the future, regardless of their ability to pay. That's especially important given the global nature of the program, which is in principle it's important everywhere. The selection committee works in a couple of phases and with a lot of different materials, but everything that we do on the selection committee is focused on that question. Does this candidate have the potential to move into a leadership role in the future in whatever field it is that he or she says he wants to pursue? On the left side of the screen, you can see a few things that you just need to think about before you start working on an application. There's an upper age limit of 28 years on the program. The program, as I mentioned earlier, but I'll just reiterate, is open to any citizenship. So whatever your citizenship is, it not only doesn't matter in terms of submitting an application, but it's not part of our assessment process. And Mandarin language isn't required to apply, and that also isn't part of our decision-making process. So if you're strong in Mandarin or have zero Mandarin, it's not going to affect our decision. what we're interested in is your potential as a leader, and you could be anywhere on that scale regardless of your capacity to be a leader in certain fields. We do need you to have finished your undergraduate degree before you enroll as a student at Tsinghua University. Not a problem for those of you who are already in postgraduate programs. The next item that you see here is the essay, and that really is the central part of our decision-making process. It's where we dedicate most of our time, and I think it's where you as an applicant will spend most of your time.